Niklas, I mean, it's a pretty amazing story, isn't it, that you did that. You sold Skype to eBay for 3.1 billion in 2005. You reacquired it. You sold it again to Microsoft. That's a pretty amazing play. I mean, do you get a lot of people sort of ribbing you about how you did that?
Well, yeah, well, the question comes up for sure. But you know what was all about was that we wanted to create a great company that could last for 10, 15 years or maybe 20 years. And you know, so our objective was never kind of, okay, how do we engineer a sale? It was all about building a company. And back then in 2005, you know, I think we had 20 million users, and we knew that, you know, all the big companies like Microsoft, AOL, Yahoo, and Google were going to get into our markets. We didn't know if we had staying power or not. So that's why we kind of ended up with a sale to eBay. It wasn't, you know, so we wanted to kind of continue to drive the company, to build the company. That's why I think we got quite eager to participate in the buyout when eBay decided to sell the majority of the company.
But you principally built a lot of your career and your work outside of the Valley in the US. Was it, did something happen to you to make you feel that way, that you wanted to really sort of go international?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, first of all, I'm coming from a small country, Sweden, with 9 million people. And it's such a small market that if you are successful in your home market, you're not successful, you're just too small. So that kind of gives you automatically that mindset that you have to build a company that can be successful internationally. So with Skype, actually, what we did was that we decided we don't have a home market. You know, so I was from Sweden, our engineering team was in Estonia, and my co-founder from Denmark. So we just said, okay, we're going to create a company that can be an international company without a home market. And I think that that's something that we now, with Atomic, is making part of our playbook, that it's all about, you know, if you have something that works, you really need to go out and build an international company, because the international markets become more and more important for companies.
But isn't this a sort of a high-risk strategy? Is there a sort of, are you hedging, is it possibly a hedge against slowdown in Western markets, going for growth markets? I mean, you know, the companies that you're investing in range from London, Beijing, Sao Paulo, Istanbul, Tokyo. Is it that you're going for growth in those markets rather than perhaps innovation? Sure.
So you know, the sweet spot for us is really the growth stage, where a company has something that works. They have a product that works, and maybe they've been, you know, focused on one product in one market. And the next stage in growth for the company may be then to expand internationally. That's where we really can help the company. And it's also really hard, you know, while, you know, in technology, there's a lot of new technologies coming up all the time, new platforms, and so, you know, the product know-how, how to develop products and is kind of changing with the technology changes. But the way to do business in Latin America or you know, Korea or Japan doesn't really change. And that's something that we built up, you know, when with our team, that how do you go about, you know, do business in Korea and China and Japan, Brazil. So that's something we can then help companies with, you know, with assisting them with that international expansion, because that's something that they may not be native to the founders.
But it's not something, surely it's something that can be reproduced. I mean, if you were a New York VC or a Valley VC and you wanted your company to go international, surely you just go to Tokyo, you hire local people. I mean, what's the special sauce that you think you've got as opposed to perhaps a competitor?
Sure. I mean, everything is, of course, replicable, but it also takes time. I think, you know, what we have is that we have been in these markets for a long time. So, you know, Shinawata, who's our country manager in Japan, he was the president for Skype. You know, he's been in that market working with me for you know, maybe almost 10 years, and the same thing in China with Kelly Poon. So those are deep networks and relationships that we have. So it's just not something that, okay, you fly in and do some business development.
You've brought a lot of the people you worked with at Skype into Atomico, haven't you? Has that been? Do you feel that's been a huge advantage?
It has, because it's specifically in these markets. You know, these country managers in these countries is very, very important, because those are relationships that, you know, we've been building up together over many years. So that's been quite important.
Sometimes it hasn't worked, though, is it? to some extent. I mean, if you look at perhaps Fab, tried to expand to Germany very, very quickly. Fab has been, had gone through enormous changes over the last year, quite a lot of controversy about how they've gone about that. So it's not necessarily always working, or is it something you think that's more germane to that particular company?
No, I think, sometimes we've been too eager to help companies to expand too quickly when they maybe haven't really been ready.
What's another example of that then?
So another one would be a company called Wrap,
right,
which is a Swedish-based company, and they had a plan, and we had a plan together what to do, and then wanted to focus very much on the first the Swedish market as a test market and US, but then the competition came up with a rocket internet company called Dropbox, and they launched in 10 markets aggressively. So we had to we needed to beat them in all those markets. So that we did that expansion really too early before the product was ready.
Yeah.
So that was distraction. So sometimes you do it because you're maybe too eager, and sometimes because of you think that there is too much competition. So, so it's actually really hard to find the right timing.
Do you feel like you've been blooded, as it were, but to some? I mean, you did Juiced, for instance, which is very early video play. That was quite hard to get right, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that with Juiced was the right time, but we didn't get all the right content, and also technology got commoditized, and all the content owner decided that they wanted to do things themselves, and they were very successful with Hulu and also direct distribution through their websites.
What's your opinion of that market now? That's where it is right now. I mean, there's enormous amounts of competition against Netflix.
I think one thing I've learned, both being investor in content companies doing content distribution and also trying to build them, it's really hard. It's also that because you're dependent on third parties who own the content, and then you don't really control your destiny. So
does that put you off ever going into video again?
Yeah, so we're not all over those kind of companies, because it just makes it more complex, and if you have less control, the company has less control of its destiny. So
you're an investor in RDO. Spotify is pretty rampant now, as it were, especially in North America. I mean, how do you see that play? And we're waiting to see what Apple's big play in that move as well, and Amazon as well. What's your view now about that? What are the competitive environment for audio?
I think that that whole streaming music is still, if you think that's where everything is going, it's still early days. For sure, Spotify done an amazing job. I'm really happy to see, another fellow Swedish company being extremely successful as an international.
So long as the Swedes win?
As long as the Swedes win, I'm happy. Yes, of course. No, but it's a success story. But also, again, this business is really, really hard, because sometimes you have this business which are very sexy, like music, may not be the best business models because you have very thin margins. If you compare that to companies like Supercell, who actually create their own content, they have an amazing gross margin, and they can do whatever they want. So we kind of prefer companies which have, if they control their own IP that they're selling.
One of the problems that's happened over the last couple of years, it's a problem. It's a nice problem to have. You take a company like Rovio with Angry Birds, you take a company like Supercell, Clash of Clans. Everybody's child is playing Clash of Clans these days. Is there a structural problem when a company gets a breakout game that just goes crazy for a while, and obviously they double down on it, but doesn't that lock them into a silo, into a niche? How can they produce more than one hit? You look at the problems that Zynga had, for instance, early on, and continue to have. How do you, optimize around that? How do you get around that issue?
Well, you're right that with game companies, the scary thing is like, how is it? It is hit-driven business, and then you don't know, is these guys, is the company just going to produce one hit, or is it going to be ABBA or Beatles just coming up with more and more great music? So. And that's
I like the reference to ABBA there.
Yeah, of course. But with Supercell, what's amazing to see now is that they came out with Boom Beach, which being top 5 in, and in some countries number one in several markets. So they've really been, really good at taking that, building a skill set how to develop games, and become successful with 3 games now that they've launched. That's quite remarkable. So that tells you that it's not luck, it's skill. And I think it's also about, again, it comes back to people that, like a company like Supercell have been able to recruit some amazing game developers, and they're realizing that it's all about, it's actually more art than science in the way that they're doing it, and they're very passionate about it. They developed a whole culture around, around having, the best game developers, not having the largest companies in the world, but actually quite small, but really, really good people.
Do you think there's something about that? I mean, you mentioned culture. How do you develop cultures inside the companies you invest in and the entrepreneurs that you work with? Is it something that's very important to you, or do you feel that you've got a particular edge that perhaps maybe a Valley VC or a New York VC doesn't have?
Well, the investors have not much to do with the culture. I mean, what we can do as an investor, we have to make judgment calls on the founders, and it's, you spending some time with the founders that you want to invest in, you realize if they have what it takes to be a good, not only this technical skill set, but also need to have the leadership, and with that also comes culture. And I think the great entrepreneurs that you see are the ones who are very passionate about what they're doing, very thoughtful, but also very good leaders in terms of building a great culture around their companies. And those are typically companies which have, a mission, a strong mission, what about they're doing.
Education is also quite a big interest of yours. You're an investor in Newton, which has raised about $105 million so far. We just had a panel on education.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd be quite interested to get your view on that. I mean, it's been a tough sector for people to really hack at.
Yeah.
Do you think it's crackable as a market, education?
It's one of those. It's one of the largest industries in the world. I think it's whatever how you define it, $5 trillion. It's a huge industry. Hasn't really been disrupted by technology, and I think everyone who understands software and technology thinks that it's ought to happen, and when it's the right time. I think that now you're starting to see a lot of interesting companies doing good stuff, and I think Newton is certainly the one that we think has a great potential to really to improve education and to provide technology that makes students learn quicker and much more customized learning.
It's based very much around adaptive learning, I gather.
Yes, exactly. So what they're doing is that they're having big data system that adopts your learning courses according to your ability. And the test that we're doing is really, really promising, and where pass rates are improving for students using the technology. So it's very promising.
The Alibaba IPO, that's just breaking at the moment. Is it something you're taking an interest in and you're watching closely? What's your opinion?
Well, we are investing in not public companies, so we're not looking at it, taking interest at it as an investor.
What effect do you think it'll have?
Sure, but I think it's significant because it's going to be one of the largest tech IPOs, and it's a Chinese company. I think what you're starting to see now is that you have some of the Chinese companies, obviously Alibaba and Tencent would be the two most prominent ones, who have been historically very focused on the domestic Chinese market, because it's such a huge market and it's been growing tremendously. But I think now you're starting to see specifically these two companies, they're so big now, so they're going to start looking for growth elsewhere. I think this is fantastic for the technology ecosystem, because so the thesis that we have is also that it's not about so great companies can come from everywhere, but also what you're starting to see now, great exits will come from everywhere. So it's not about, if you're a startup in Berlin or in Sao Paulo or in New York, you don't necessarily need to sell your company to a West Coast giant. You can sell it to a Chinese giant, or like Supercell did, sold half the company to a giant in Japan. So this, I think, is really, really good for the international tech ecosystem, that you're starting to have these giants in different places in the world who are then able to acquire companies.
It's a matter of uncovering those giants and then getting deeply into them. I think that there's some research that you guys have been working on that I gather your team have done about how $44 billion companies were created in Silicon Valley in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
18 in China and 55 created in the rest of the world, from New York to Europe. Do you feel those are the figures that numbers that you're working on, effectively?
Yeah, so I think what we said, like, let's look at some of these numbers, because the thesis is that the more and more likelihood that great companies will come from other places than Silicon Valley. That doesn't mean that we still believe that if you want to go and fish in one pond, probably Silicon Valley is for sure the best pond, because the other so China is a big place, but also the rest of the world is a pretty big place. So it's not it's not one other location, but what it tells you is that the more and more likelihood that great companies will come out from places that you may not think about, and I think that that can be anywhere, so it's I think it's encouraging for entrepreneurs who starting companies wherever they are based, that is more and more opportunities for them to become successful.
I mean, because you were the co-founder of Skype, that's probably going to follow you forever, isn't it? And it's kind of one of the big companies that's been created in the last 20 years. I'm sure it'll be around forever. I mean, obviously there's been a huge change at Microsoft now with Satya Nadella, the new CEO. What's your feeling about Microsoft and its trajectory and its future?
I think another piece of research you can do is that when you see companies who are led by the founders, and those founders are technologists or product people, those companies are typically very successful, continue to be successful. And what you could see, I think, with Microsoft was once Gates kind of stepped down, Microsoft become less relevant. So I think the challenge for them now is, like, how can it be more and more relevant in the technology ecosystem, because they have been less relevant, But
what you're saying is that Microsoft is over.
No, I don't say that, but I say that it's a challenge. Looking for a headline, aren't you?
Go for it.
No, but I think that it's an interesting period for Microsoft, and I haven't spent a lot of time analyzing it, but I think they really need to be focused on the products, on the technologies, and innovation, which I think they haven't been for a long time, because they've been so successful with the products, with the Office and Windows and those products, will become less and less relevant. So they kind of, they're pivoting into the cloud. They kind of were not really there really with mobile. Maybe the new mobile products is going to become successful, but it's they're behind.
I mean, but there's an implicit criticism there to some extent from you, isn't there, that they've lost their way on a massive product like Skype. I mean, fiddling around the edges, like removing so-called offensive emoticons, that's quite clearly, as you were saying, that if you lose that focus on product, then the entity, whatever it is, the product, loses its way. I mean, that appears to be what you're saying.
No, I'm saying is that companies in technology, you need to be, even if you're the leader, you need, as long as you're focused on innovation, on product, and on your customers' value, great customer experience, you're probably okay. So I'm saying is that whether that's Microsoft or any other large company, they need to be focused on those areas.
So does that mean therefore that the entrepreneurs that you back at Atomico, are you saying therefore you're going to keep the entrepreneur in place for the life of the company?
That's certainly always our ambition. There are situations where entrepreneurs are, the founder of a company may not scale, and then that's, when that happens, then that's typically like a challenging period for a company. So the thing that I think that what we're learning when we're investing now, we invest in over 60 companies. The companies which tend to be more successful are the ones who have founders who are really great, not just, sometimes you can, fall in love with the opportunity, but you may not have 100% belief in the founder, and then that's typically when you maybe shouldn't make the investment.
In the future, I know that you're passionate about sailing. In the future, would you like to be considered, eventually considered as an innovator, an investor or as a sailor?
I would like to be. My ambition is to try to help to build, to drive change. That's always why I've been driven by, like, and also maybe not take the obvious route. So, for me right now with Atomico, one of the things, of course, we wanted to become, a great technology investment firm, but we also very much we want to help to build that ecosystem, the international ecosystem for entrepreneurs, wherever they are. And, whether you're in Stockholm or in Sao Paulo or, in London or Tokyo, that's what we want to do. That's my objective. That's what, try to help to lead that growth.
Niklas Zennström, thank you very much.